Long haul truckers, what's the creepiest, most paranormal thing you've seen on the road at night? Maybe a bit off the mark, but it still scared the crap out of me. I was headed west on I-76 here in Denver, just cruising along at about 70 miles per hour. Out of nowhere, I saw a massive, almost solid cloud of what looked to be dirt coming at me. I'd say it was at least 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. I scanned ahead of me but couldn't see any vehicle it could have came from. With nowhere to go, I slowed down and took the hit, hoping there wasn't anything big enough in there to come through the windshield or jack up my truck. Owner-operator. It was pretty loud as I smashed through it. The instant it hit, I knew it wasn't dirt though. I immediately hit the washers because I couldn't see a dang thing through all of the carnage. My windshield was painted with guts. Turns out it was bees. Freaking huge bees that sounded like rocks when they hit. I can't even imagine seeing that swarm if I was walking. They would kill the crap out of anything in their path. Hi, I'd like to buy this movie plot from you. I was driving near Las Vegas at around 3 AM. I had been following a few black SUVs along the highway for a good hour or so. They had Nevada plates that were single-digit numbers in order. 1, 2, 3. Suddenly they all pulled off the highway down a dirt path. There was no mile marker or cactus that would indicate a path there. It was just dirt. After pulling off the road, they all turned their lights off. I didn't stick around. It was creepy. According to the DMVNV website, special license plates are also issued to a number of Nevada law enforcement agencies, state elected officials and the Nevada congressional delegation. Plate 1 belongs to the Nevada governor. 2 belongs to the lieutenant governor. Westbound I-90 between Vantage and Ellensburg, WA. Young woman in a summer dress and heels walking alone on the shoulder towards Ellensburg. No vehicles for miles, so I knew she didn't break down. If you are familiar with this stretch of 90, you know there aren't any houses either. It's desolate. I pull over and ask if she needs a ride. She gets in, says thank you, and I immediately see that she's been crying. I silently take her to the nearest gas station and let her out. She thanks me and tells me her boyfriend had gotten mad at her shortly before I had stopped and kicked her out. Dude, if you're reading this, I hope you rots in heck. You're a good person, friend. Wheel. I'm not a trucker, but a motorcyclist, which kinda makes it even more spooky. Drove home from my GFS house. Just a 20-minute ride, but it was 3 AM and the road goes through a forest without any street lights. So I ride through the forest, already giving everything my little 50cc dirt bike had in it back then, and suddenly on the side of the road, a freaking naked mannequin is standing. I saw it appear in my headlights and drove by it only doing like 60 km/h. It was scary as heck. A freaking mannequin standing there naked on the side of a dark road in a forest at 3 AM in the morning. Dang. I still get the shivers. Goes to Google cost of a mannequin. I picked up a hitchhiker in my small Nissan Versa sedan, and we were driving down the freeway. There was a big vehicle in front of me, so I couldn't see what was in front of that, when all of a sudden the other guy started yelling tyre, tyre, and pointing ahead of us. I slammed on my brakes just in time to see the SUV in front of us swerve too late as the car in front of it swerved as this massive tire that was rolling down the freeway demolished the front end of the vehicle in front of me and bounded high into the air, coming down in front of my car where the steel band broke and it stopped rolling. If I hadn't slammed on the brakes, it probably would have come down on top of me. He got out at the next gas station. I don't remember his name, but I think he saved my life that day. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He is the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story he had goosebumps and a concerned expression, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and crap-stained pants. I'll tell this story in the first person as he told it to me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I am on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of bumfrick nowhere when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first I just thought it was roadkill. as is usually the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy's taking the antlers as a trophy, or he's freaking sick. As I got closer still I can now see that this guy's eating the freaking deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. He stands up and that's when I see that it's freaking huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh frick, this thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed and I'm about to the point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it and get the heck out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me. Again, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle nose Pete. Old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield. Known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is freaking giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares the crap out of me. Sorry for the wall of text. It's a story worth sharing though. TLDR, Bigfoot eating a deer on the side of road. I've been scrolling through this thread for a good 45 minutes and I've seen a lot of similar stories about some 8-foot figure who looked like Bigfoot with human intelligence. And here's the catch. They all say it was in Laredo. My dad is a truck driver and about 13-15 years ago while resting at the side of the road he woke up in the morning seeing that his entire trailer was robbed empty. My dad's a heavy sleeper but his cargo could not have been stolen without at least a forklift and everyone would have woken up by a forklift unloading a trailer. My dad suspects the robbers used a pump to get some kind of chloroform into his cabin to make sure he couldn't wake up. Thank God nothing happened to your dad. My great uncle was a long haul trucker and he swears that one time he was driving down the road to see 2 guys pull a rolled up carpet out of the trunk of their car and throw it in the river. Whether that's true or not I don't know, but it's still creepy nonetheless. Okay, so here is a spook for you, and to this day I still have no idea WTF. So I was in the VAMD area and had a lot of work related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of VA. Got dragged off to other places even further out. The usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I am not going to be able to get home in time to start my, thankfully late afternoon, Monday. I'm fully rested, I didn't do any drinking. I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 AM. In the middle of bumfuck nowhere between Roanoke and DC. Absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour. No taillights either. No road lamps either. It's dark. It's mildly damp. It's foggy. I have the music up. I'm feeling good. All is fine. And then I just happen to look to the left and there is a freaking dog barking at me. A German Shepherd. In a car passenger seat. Somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to its window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it, too, because at first my brain is not registering cop car, dummy. I'm doing 90 plus in a 75. I promptly have the oh crap moment when the dog, the instruments, the white Crown Vic light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down hard but safe to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over because, wait, there is no shoulder on the left side of this road. I look back to my left, where there is still no shoulder room for another car, and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the freaking highway. Flipped on all my light bars and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No tail lights, no headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine. And I can see for a nice long distance both ways, too. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility and a lot of extra lighting. A Ford SUV with the trimmings. There is no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet sloped grass and rocks on my left side. So, yep, there you have it. Ghost cop and his dog didn't like me speeding, apparently. It was a warning to slow down cause you were gonna crash. They saved your life. My dad has several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is from actually just in his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled off at the next diner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. The creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down steep grade and said all of the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer it jumped down and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound it leaped down and then leaped over to the other side of the embankment. At the time he thought it was a Sasquatch. Now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountain. I'm a stand-up comic. I often refer to my profession as being a trucker with jokes. Near the north end of mainland Michigan, I saw a car stopped on the side of the highway. We hadn't seen a car for a while. It was 2 a.m. I commented to my buddy, "Poor bastard." But as we passed the car, the lights came on and it got back on the road. Odd timing. And then, it was gaining on us. I told my friend to speed. He did. He sped more and the car kept closing in. We were doing 120 and this guy was catching up to us. We saw an exit with a hotel so we took it and drove right in front of the building, where it was well lit and we could see the front desk clerk. The car got off that exit too. It drove into the hotel parking lot, then turned around, and got back on the highway. I'll never know what that guy wanted from us. I'm fine with that remaining a mystery. Let's not meet. Creepiest, driving I-40 I-30 through Texas and Arkansas. I would see what looked like animals' faces popping out of the bushes but longer than a glance proved nothing there. They had just paved the highway, and there was hardly any traffic. I was dead tired. It was super dark. Highway hypnosis I suppose. Paranormal. When I went to local driving, my route ran near an air reserve base in Indiana, so you'd see planes and helicopters pretty often. One night, about 2 a.m., I was headed to pick up another load when I saw a bright green light in the corner of my windshield. It was too low to be an aircraft. It moved pretty slowly, then darted and I lost sight of it behind some trees I drove by. Typical I saw UFO crap, but I still think it was just a helicopter or a jet that I saw at the perfect angle that turned after a takeoff. The jet pilots have broken the sound barrier over town a couple times in the past. Sonic boom. So a jet flying abnormally isn't necessarily out of the realm of possibility. Just batshit crazy. Driving south on I-75 in the winter in Ohio, I witnessed a compact car like a Cobalt or similar get on the on-ramp to merge into I-75 north and lost control. They went sideways, fell at least 6 feet off the ramp and onto the shoulder of the interstate, landing on all four wheels, spun 360 degrees, and then proceeded to merge into traffic like it was freaking nothing. Blew my freaking mind. The CB radio was going freaking nuts for about 5 minutes. Holy crap, WHO else just freaking saw that, etc. That last story was somebody driving in real life like they do in GTA. I drove by a marsh every night when I was going home from work. One night I saw a car pulled over with hazards on. Dude was head to toe covered in blood. No crash, no injury, just covered in blood. Maybe he just had one heck of a bloody nose. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 36 hours or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, He'd regularly ask me things like how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod, jerk thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random butt mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60 plus mph. Only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual. Jesus, take the wheel while I grab a nap for the next 12 miles kthx. My grandfather was in the Air Force and one night he was driving back to his base, maybe, I can't quite remember, and he saw a woman standing on the side of the road in a long white dress at about 2 a.m. He circled back to ask if she needed help and she was nowhere to be seen. He searched for her for about an hour before giving up and deciding to leave it alone. When he decided to go on his way, he had a strong feeling that he needed to switch lanes. He was on the road alone in the middle of the night, so he had no idea why, and just ahead on the road there was a broken down truck with no hazards on that he would have hit and probably been killed by if he stayed in the lane he had been in. To this day he's convinced the woman was trying to warn him, like an omen or something. I was 23, my newly married husband and I decided driving team would be a fun adventure after college, rather than jumping into the 9-5. I was down in Arizona on a long stretch of nothing about 4 a.m. when a guy pulled up next to me waving his CB. I never left mine on. Listening to those guys BS was irritating. I turned on my CB and he told me I had a blown tire. I thanked him, figuring I would stop at the next truck stop. He kept harassing me to pull over and check my tire for a good 40 miles. I finally got to a next town and pile a truck stop. Got out and checked my truck. No blown tires anywhere. No clue what that guy would have done to me, but so glad I trusted my gut and didn't stop. Not paranormal, but I have plenty of stories as a young woman on the road. By reading all these comment threads I've come to realize how much I need to learn from life. Somebody says something like that to me, I am stopping instantly. In the early 1990s, I was driving from a small town in Ontario, Canada to Florida. I just got past the border at around 3 a.m. and found out one of the roads I needed to turn on was closed. There was no one around, so I looked at my map and decided to turn around and take a different road. As I made the turn, I immediately knew that I shouldn't go this way. It was a tiny, one-way street and there was trash scattered all over. It looked like a huge group of people were just there, but there was no one. No streetlights, no other cars or houses or any reason for anyone to be out there. I was so creeped out that I turned around and went the correct way. This story isn't paranormal, but it is unusual. There was also a time where it was late at night again and I was near and through Ontario, driving on an old, bumpy, twisty road. There was no one around. I looked to my left and I saw a face. It looked like a horse. I immediately stopped my car and noticed that there was a horse following me. After a few minutes another car pulled up and they were looking for the horse. This one ended well with the farmer taking the horse back. It really freaked me out though. Not exactly at a road, but in the sky. I'm a pilot and usually fly around Florida. This specific night I was out at around 11:30 p.m. with a friend, flying down the eastern shoreline. when I suddenly see a medium-sized white light slowly start coming towards us, stop, and then go vertically into the ocean and disappear. Both my friend and I saw it and we were completely speechless. Asked the air traffic control if there were any kind of aircraft around us and he told us we were the only aircraft in a 40-mile radius. Real common for pilots to see things. The FAA has a zero tolerance policy on taking about them, so you don't hear about it but talk to any retired pilot. Saw a clown staggering down an alley in the city, back facing us, while we were coming to a stoplight at like 1 AM. Looked like he was still blowing balloons, or masturbating. Not seeing his face made it more ominous. I'm not sure if it's either really creepy or sad. Maybe he was on his way to abduct children. Or maybe he was blind drunk after a long day. Wow, balloons is a lucky guy. I'm a truck driver in the UK. Was driving through rural Scotland one night going down a country lane. All of a sudden I start to see flashing lights come through the trees. Lights of all colors flashing through the trees and causing some really freaky looking shadows on the road. I'm not a believer of aliens or anything but my first thought was UFOs. Safe to say I put my foot down and got out of there. Found out the next day it was rape happening in a field. But at the time it didn't half scare me. I was coming back home from a trip from Michigan and I saw these people wearing cult-like robes. One in town, one on a highway, and one in a park. All staring at me. Myself and two friends had to drive from Laredo, TX to Baton Rouge, LA one night in my Ford van. It was about 2 AM. There is a particularly long and dark section of highway just outside Laredo. No buildings, towns or lights for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up on a truck and pulled out into the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly looking person with my passenger mirror. Can still remember seeing that the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to hitting this person. Laredo TX. You could have stopped right there and I would have agreed on the creepy part. I'm not a trucker but my cousin was for a short stint. A lion ran out in front of him when he had gotten out to pee. He called his mom and she asked if he was high. He denied it and said a freaking lion ran out in front of me. I'm telling you. A few days later, the news revealed animals had escaped from a local zoo he was near, including a lion. We love to tell that story to everyone. Not a trucker but I've driven cross country a few times. Have two freaky things that have happened. First, middle of the night with a buddy and we pulled off to the side of the highway to take a pee and switch drivers. Nobody else around on the road. I walk to the side, pitch black, whip it out and start to pee. My buddy is just stretching his back or whatever. I heard something in the woods shake a tree. No other way to describe it. A tree about 30 feet away shook. Then I hear something big crashing through the woods coming straight for us in the car. My buddy and I don't even say anything. He dives in the driver's side and I jump through the passenger window, pants still down. He floors it out of there, legs and pants dangling outside. Never did see anything in the rear view mirror but there was something out there coming at us. My buddy likes to say he heard me stop peeing when that tree shook. Second, I was solo somewhere in West Virginia, again middle of the night. I got off an exit, one of those long curvy ones. I saw lights before I got off and assumed it was exit stuff, or maybe even construction. Get to the exit and it's not construction, it's a ton of army or National Guard guys. The exit was lit up brighter than daytime, so many lights set up pointing everywhere. The army guys were completely decked out, gas masks on and assault rifles. They were sprinting around. One guy at the corner was frantically waving me through to get back on the highway. I gunned it out of there. Looked in the news later and didn't see anything. No idea what was going on that night. Not a long haul trucker but thought this would fit here. Also on mobile, so sorry for format. My mom, sister and I were on our way to a baseball game of mine during my junior year of high school. This was in northern New York so spring got a little chilly at times. The main road we took stretched about 35 miles and was nothing but cornfields and tree lines. We hit a stretch of the road that was super foggy for no reason so my mom slowed down to her proper speed. We finally reached the end of the fog and we all looked to the left to see where we were. About 50 yards from the road was a man and woman in what appeared to be wedding clothing from at least 100 years ago. Man wearing a big top hat and the woman wearing a very old looking white dress, holding hands with their backs to us, walking towards the wood line. We drove past and I just remember the silence in the car until my mom said, "What the frick was that?" Till this day whenever we are together and one of us tells the story we all get goosebumps. I saw a couple dressed like this walking through the parking lot of a Chili's. Less creepy during the daytime, but I did go around a second time to make sure it was real, and when I passed again they were both yelling at some guy who was trying to load his kids in a minivan. Not a trucker, but I was driving through Nevada on a long ride trip. About 3 AM. Sun barely starting to peek out. My sister was asleep in the passenger seat and my parents asleep in the back seat. So it was just me, on a straight stretch of highway in the middle of the desert. I was exhausted and extremely bored from the lack of scenery when suddenly, directly in front of me, up in the pale sky, there was a flash of green and a green meteor carved towards the horizon before flashing green again and disappeared. At first I thought it was a UFO or something, but I later read meteors can burn green if they have copper in them. Now I think fondly back on that meteor. My family was asleep for it. No one around for miles. I like to think that it was just for me. I saw a baboon in San Saba, Texas crouched down next to the road. He lifted something to his mouth and I saw nothing but fangs. So out of place that it gave me goosebumps. One of the locals explained that a lot of fake ranchers will keep exotic animals and when they grow aggressive or go in heat they will cut them loose. When I was doing the long haul thing, I was driving through Oklahoma. Don't remember exactly where, but it was late at night, and I was already tired. Well, I was driving along and saw what I thought was a Grim Reaper. Looked in my mirrors and didn't see it. At that point I decided that, regardless of how many hours I have left on my log, I'm stopping the next chance I get to rest. Later that night after getting parked, I turned on my CB and heard someone talking about a bad accident just a few miles beyond where I had stopped. After asking how long ago it happened, it turned out that if I had kept going, I would have been caught up in it. A few years ago some animal rights activists managed to release thousands of mink from a farm next to a large road at night. The road was more blood than tarmac for miles. Remains everywhere and don't even get me started on the smell. Not a trucker, but I saw some guys wearing Buddhist orange monk robe while lifting something like a sign to a pole on the side of highway. The next day I didn't see any sign, pole or anything. I'm sure I'm not wrong because the location is near the highway exit I usually take every day. Besides, why they're wearing monk robe rather than construction apparel confuses me. God dang monks and their overnight advertising. A friend of my cousin was a long haul trucker. He was making a delivery across the country and was in a hardly used dirt stretch of a rural route. Since the road wasn't exactly peachy, he had to drive slowly. He sees another truck slowly approaching from the opposite direction, and he sees the truck is the same as his. Since this isn't fairly uncommon, he didn't think much of it, but as the other one grew closer he decided to honk in recognition of having the same kind of truck. The other one replies and all is good. That is, until they narrowly and very slowly had to pass one another. He turned to look at the driver and he saw himself. Not a reflection, not a similar person, but his exact same copy. Same clothes, same hat, same red beard, staring at him. They passed each other and that was that. He told me he'd seen very weird things, but that was the moment he decided to stop being a trucker. I bet you his doppelgänger was also pretty freaked out too. I remember being at a barbershop with my grandpa way back when, and one trucker told a story about traveling through Florida at night. He said that he hadn't seen anywhere to stop and finally had to pull to the side of the road to take a pee. A state trooper pulled up and told him it was dangerous to be stopping in the area, then turned on his floodlight and flashed it out into the dark. The trucker said that dozens of eyes from alligators flashed back in the light and he quickly jumped back in his truck. Didn't stop anywhere like that down there again. This is my father's story, and he wasn't a long haul trucker but rather a 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s, and without a certain long haul trucker I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours and my dad was the only one working the night shift. 11/7 I think. A guy comes in and just gives him the creeps. Seems sketchy. He was wearing tight jacket pants and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. It was during the summer and was warm, so why is he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of truck drivers used the station as it was the only one open 24 hours for a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where they let truckers park and sleep or take a break. On this night at this time it was just my dad, sketchy dude, and one trucker in there he kinda knew, as in, came in frequent enough to be conversational, and asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the sketchy guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. Cool trucker guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booths. They had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out this was pretty middle of nowhere rural southeast United States in the 1970s. CB and landline was it. My dad only had a landline in the store. Dad did not have any protection or weapon of any kind. So the hours passed and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this truck driver guy in a car comes hauling butt into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area and my dad's station was the first place he found. Calls 911 to report that he had walked in on a gas station 40 miles back, next closest station, to find the attendant shot and dead. No one else around. And the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehend the guy in the blue car. My dad confirms it was sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charge him with murder and armed robbery. To the long haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks and hope you're keeping it real. Also worth adding that apparently sketchy guy in blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation or something. He was in the system. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.